and welcome to another session of Careers Beyond Academia, hosted by the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design. My name is Fiona Cunningham, and I'm the Director of Research and Training at the Stem Cell Network. A housekeeping note that this webinar is being recorded, and we are thrilled to be co-hosting this series with Medicine by Design. Our goal is to expose as many trainees as possible to different careers that are available after a degree in the life sciences, and to start to understand the qualifications and experience necessary to secure that role. The Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design have teamed up to host this series, which has already highlighted a wide variety of careers available after a degree in the life sciences. You can see past Beyond Academia recordings on the Stem Cell Network's YouTube channel, and we have new sessions coming out monthly throughout the year. SCN also offers other training events that occur monthly. You can check out our websites and social media for the many other opportunities that the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design offer throughout the year, including workshops, seminars, symposiums, and don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to be notified of upcoming opportunities. Links to the sign up are provided on our websites. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our first speaker, Jenny Crick. Jenny works in the Integrity and Ethics team at Canadian Science Publishing. She has a master's degree in plant genetics and worked as a plant researcher at the Vineline Research and Innovation Center before coming to scientific publishing. Jenny also writes about science on the side and has had her nonfiction published in the Globe and Mail. In her current role, Jenny uses her research background to navigate cases of scientific misconduct or fraud and ensure that the research being published is real and robust. Jenny, please go ahead and share your screen, and I'll hand it over to you for your presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Perfect, thanks. Okay. And is everybody seeing my slides there?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks so much for the introduction. Hi, my name is Jenny Crick, and I work as an integrity specialist for a scientific publisher. I'm really happy to be here to give you a rundown of the job I do and the path I took to get here. So my official title is an editorial integrity specialist, and I work at Canadian Science Publishing, which is one of the main journal publishers in Canada. We publish 22 journals across STEM fields, so everything from engineering to botany, and I work on all of those journals. And it's also a not-for-profit publisher, which makes it kind of unique as well. I started my career or my education with a Bachelor's of Science at U of T, and I specialized in human biology. At the same time, I did a double major in English literature because I'd always felt kind of torn between biology and writing. But I figured that the biology was the thing I'd need more formal training to be able to do, since you can't really go into a lab without that. Whereas I thought I could kind of pursue my creative interests on the side. So the double major was kind of a way to hedge my bets and not totally leave that creative interest behind, but still make sure I had the Bachelor's of Science for whatever I wanted to do next. Having that language element has actually been really helpful for my career path, which I'll touch on a bit later. And by the end of my undergrad, even though I was in a human biology major, I'd realized I had a growing interest in genetics and plants, so then I moved on to Carleton University to do a master's in plant genetics. So here's an overview of my career timeline up until now. I graduated from my undergrad in 2018, and then I went straight into my master's and graduated from that in 2021, which was also right in the middle of the COVID lockdown in Ottawa. I had been thinking pretty seriously about doing a PhD after my master's, but because everything was so locked down at the time that I finished, I just didn't think it would be a good idea to try to start something new. So I decided to first go out and sort of see what I could do with my master's in terms of a job. As I was graduating, I also feel like I was hearing a lot about how it was super hard out there. The economy was down, we were entering a recession, and no one was hiring. And I really took that on board. So I was applying super aggressively to any and every job I could leading up to finishing my master's. This meant that I did end up with a couple of offers pretty soon after graduation. And one was with a really big research institution that was sort of seen as a major goal for people in agriculture to get to. And it was typically seen as being really reliable and well paid once you were in and once you were permanent. So at that point, I was feeling so worried about security that I ended up going with that option because I felt like I needed to prioritize those things. So I took this job at the big institution, which I won't name because it ended up being a really, really bad job. And I didn't end up staying very long. But I still wanted to put it on the timeline because I think sometimes we don't really talk about our flops or failures. And speaking with friends and colleagues, I think it's pretty common for new grads to end up with a really bad first job. And my takeaways from having that happen were that if I hadn't had such a sort of scarcity mindset when I was job hunting, I might have spotted some of those red flags during the interviewing process and just prioritized choosing a job that sounded like a better fit. So even though I'd moved somewhere new to take this job, I decided within a couple of months that it just wasn't working, and I started applying to other things. And very luckily, I got a job as a researcher in the genomics lab at the Vineland Research Center in Niagara, where they do a lot of crop research on all sorts of different plants. And it was super aligned with what I'd done my master's work on. So I spent about a year and a half there working in the lab. And then I started to feel like the work we were doing was just getting kind of repetitive. And although I'd learned a lot in the lab about how to be efficient and how to use next generation techniques, I just felt like I was ready to move on. And that's when I applied to the integrity role at CSP. And I got that, so I moved back to Ottawa in 2022, and that's the role I've been in since. So basically, my job as an integrity specialist is to investigate when there are concerns or allegations of research integrity or ethics issues in submitted papers or things that have already been published, and then to advise on when we need to reject or retract something. The research integrity space is fairly new, but for the last decade, publishers have been starting to realize that they need to have more internal checks to validate the data that they're publishing. There's been a huge uptick in retractions and high-profile cases of research fraud that you might have heard of. And that's made it clear that we can't solely rely on peer review to screen out all of the bad science. So because this is such a new area, integrity specialists tend to be very collaborative rather than competitive. So I'm in several cross-publisher working groups and meetings where specialists from all of the different publishing houses across the world are coming together to share strategies. And because of that, I would say that most of the people I know working in these roles come from a science background, and they usually have a PhD or a master's, and it's usually in the life sciences, just because that's where most of the fraud is concentrated. That said, there are also people who come from a pure publishing background, and even some that come more from a photography or a digital art background, since investigating image manipulation is such a huge part of the job. I've listed what I would say is the salary range that I've heard of, and I think it depends a lot on your level of education and experience, and then also just the size of the publisher that you're working for. The skills that I would say I use daily are falling back on my scientific experience and my knowledge of what lab results should look like. Also, I really need to have an eye for detail, although that's something I think I'm still developing, but it's really important when you're combing through data. And then communication. We do a lot of written reports, and then we do a lot of meeting after investigations with our editors-in-chief to kind of build a case for them and give them the advice on what we think they need to do. And so this is where I feel like I really fall back on the rhetorical skills that I learned in my English degree, and I'm really glad I have that. So the other careers I considered were continuing in plant research, doing some sort of science journalism or science writing, and maybe teaching because I really enjoyed being a TA during grad school. But I have a training component to the job that I do now, so I feel like I'm sort of getting a bit of that in this role anyways. So my day-to-day is basically investigating allegations of or suspicions of misconduct in papers. And what I'm looking for are signs of data manipulation, so things that don't look right, signs of paper mills, which are big companies that exist just to make fake papers that they then sell authorship spots on to people who are desperate to boost their publication numbers, or investigating animal or human research ethics issues. So after I've gone through and done all of that, which involves pulling microscopy and other images into Photoshop, looking at the peer review and combing through the references, I create a report, and then I meet with the editors-in-chief to advise them on what we need to do as a next step. I also research and write new policies that pertain to research integrity as things are coming up. So I recently wrote our company's policy on generative AI, and also a policy requiring raw image data on submission of papers. And then the final part of my job is recruiting and training editors, particularly in terms of integrity concerns. So I wanted to show a couple examples of things I've seen in my work. So this is a multi-panel figure where it looks like you've got 3 different pictures of cells on a plate or something. But in fact, you can see from that conserved triangle in the middle that someone has actually just gone in and sort of photoshopped extra cells to make it look like they had 3 different pictures when they didn't. This one here on the left is a flow cytometry histogram where someone's basically gone in, it looks like with MS Paint, and just erased a whole bunch of dots that they felt they didn't need there. And then on the right, we have a very classic thing, which is Western blots that have been reused. So this is all within one figure, and the color-coded boxes are showing where they've reused the same row of bands over and over, which is obviously impossible. So these are all things that were published in some of our journals before we had an in-house integrity specialist. Yeah, so I guess I would say that my role does feel important to me, and that's because I think we really are keeping the science true in what we do. We're catching people that are cheating the system, and we're trying to correct the scientific record so that what is published is actually real and it represents actual experiments that have been done. I really enjoy that purpose-driven aspect of my role. And I also get to use a lot of problem solving. I get to talk to and work with researchers from really diverse fields in terms of our editors-in-chief for all the different journals. And I also get to argue with those researchers, which I personally really enjoy, because there's kind of a debate aspect to going into those meetings and trying to build a case and trying to advise, and sometimes the editors don't agree, but it's always very interesting. The challenges associated with the role, I would say, are just the pressures to get it right. There's always the fear that we're missing bad papers or retracting good research and falsely accusing people of misconduct when they didn't do something wrong. And in terms of the future career trajectories for this role, I would say if you wanted to stay in the traditional sort of publishing framework, that would probably be moving into an editorial director role or even an editor role, depending on the publisher's or the journal's structure. But I also know a lot of integrity specialists who have moved into freelance consulting. So they're doing consulting for funding agencies, venture capitalism firms, or research institutions that want someone on their side checking the integrity of the data. So if this does sound interesting to you and you're thinking you might want to go in this direction, my advice to you would be that if you're still in a research role, try to do as many experiments as you can, or at least see as many experiments as you can. Figure out what things look like when you do them badly, and then figure out what they look like when you do them right. And if you have friends or colleagues in other labs that are using techniques you won't get to use, ask to sit in, because really seeing things firsthand is the most valuable. I would also say get into microscopy if you're not already, because a huge amount of the manipulation happens in microscopic images. And review papers. Ask your PI if you can help review some papers, or you can even join a journal as an early career editor, just to try to see if you like the publishing ecosystem at all. And then finally, I would say follow that juicy retraction gossip. There's a lot of news around science publishing, and I've put a couple of good websites here where you can go kind of follow breaking stories. I find it really interesting, and it's probably a better brain break than going on X over and over again. So yeah, that would be my advice. And that's all I had.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. That was really interesting. As a reminder to everybody in the audience, we will be taking questions for both of our talks after the next speaker, so feel free to use the Q&A to post your questions. So for our second speaker, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kristel Bermejo. Dr. Kristel holds an undergraduate degree in pharmacology, as well as a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Toronto, focusing on neurodegenerative and psychiatric diseases. With over 7 years of experience, Kristel has provided strategic and scientific direction across diverse therapeutic areas, including neurology, psychiatry, and infectious diseases. Kristel is skilled in developing tactics throughout a product's life cycle and creating a range of medical education materials, from training decks and advisory board content to digital offerings like podcasts and e-learning modules. Kristel, thank you for joining us today, and please go ahead and share your screen, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Awesome. Hopefully you can see my screen. So thank you again for inviting me to this talk. I'm really excited to talk to you about medical communications and how I got into it. So as Fiona mentioned, my name is Kristel Bermejo. I'm a freelance medical writer, but I have worked in the agencies in the past, so I'll talk to you about that. So my current position, as I said, is a freelance medical writer or an owner, and MKB MedSolutions is my company that I've started as a freelance medical writer. And prior to that, I have my degrees, as Fiona mentioned. I got all of my degrees at the University of Toronto with an honors bachelor's degree in pharmacology and toxicology, followed up by a master's degree and then a PhD in still in pharmacology and toxicology, but within the psychiatric field. So I did I worked in mouse models of schizophrenia. So I started off my career, as I mentioned, doing a master's in pharmacology and toxicology. After undergrad, I really wanted to go into grad school. I was in that gung-ho phase of I'm going to change the world, and wanted to go straight into a PhD, but I did do a master's prior to that. And my master's was focused on Parkinson's model of mouse model and looking at mitochondrial changes. And so when I did my master's degree, I still very much enjoyed research and wanted to pursue that PhD. So after I got my master's degree, I enrolled into the PhD program to continue my research. Unfortunately, the work that I was doing kind of led to a dead end, and I had to switch my PhD project actually halfway through. So I had to complete my PhD in just under 2 years in a completely new therapy area and a completely new field, which was looking at mouse models in schizophrenia. So still in the lab, still working with mice. However, I did switch my therapy area. And so that's kind of one of the hardest parts, I think, that happened during my PhD was when I was hitting a roadblock. I was on the verge of quitting my PhD, but I decided to kind of move forward and complete it. But I knew kind of after 6 months, maybe a year before graduating from my PhD, that I did not want to continue on into the academic world. But what I really enjoyed was actually writing my thesis, which not a lot of people can say they enjoy. But that was kind of what sparked the interest in medical writing or in writing as a career. So after I graduated from my PhD, I actually took a couple of months off trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I talked to a lot of people in different fields, in different industry, talked to medical science liaisons, talked to researchers to try and figure out where I wanted to go. And what ended up happening was I talked to a few medical writers who explained to me kind of their day-to-day, what they do on a regular basis. And it was really something that resonated with me, because it was essentially what they do is they get to learn. What I like to call it as is that I get paid to learn, which is what I've always loved to do. I've been a researcher kind of like my whole life. I love talking about research. I love talking about science, and to get paid for that is kind of like a win-win. So I started off applying for a bunch of agencies within Toronto to try and get a job as a medical writer. And eventually I found a position in late 2017, initially as a freelancer, but then they hired me on as a full-time medical writer, and then just kind of climbing the ladder within that agency called IMC North America. So I progressed to be a senior medical writer, and then scientific lead, and an associate scientific director. So within that, obviously just kind of honing in my skills, and then eventually leading the team of medical writers, and being more of a managerial role, providing them with the guidance to how to become a better medical writer, providing them with kind of the tools that they need to advance in their own career, and also supporting the company as it relates to securing new business, or providing strategic direction to clients, and being really client facing. So I was there for until mid 2021, and then I took a position in an American agency called the Synomics Group, which is part of a larger agency network. And there I was a medical director, where I did very similar roles as I did in IMC North America. As somebody who provided strategic direction, I had a couple of direct reports that I was helping kind of with them honing in their skills and their writing skills, reviewing their work, ensuring that their work is concise, ensuring that it's factually correct, et cetera. And at the same time, providing strategic direction to our clients, making sure that we are making sure that we're hitting their objectives for the year, and providing them with recommendations and suggestions to pivot, certain deliverables, so that it has the most value in the long run. And then in the mid 2023, I decided to actually go freelance and quit my job as a medical director, and start my own company as a freelance medical writer. And I've been a freelance medical writer since. And then within that, I've essentially used all the skills that I've learned over the past 7 years to create content, provide strategic direction to our pharmaceutical clients, and then also considering that I am my own agency, if you will, having to also navigate project management, time management, and essentially the one thing I love about it is that I get to be my own boss. So if I'm stuck doing a lot of work, that's my own fault, because I took on that job. But it's been really rewarding for me, because I'm able to control how much work I take in and how much work I don't take in. And at the end of the day, if the workload is too much, I've only got myself to blame. So it's also helped me kind of be a lot more organized in terms of, knowing when the next project is coming, and really building that pipeline. So definitely honed in my project management skills in that sense. So a quick glance of what a medical writer is, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how the agency world is different from the freelancing world, but the typical background is about the same. You either have a master's or a doctorate degree, whether that's a PhD, a PharmD, or an MD. The doctorate degrees are preferable, but there are a lot of medical writers that start off just with an MSc. And the area is likely a life sciences or pharmacology, especially if you're looking to have pharmaceutical clients as your clients, having that pharmacology background and knowledge of how drugs work in the body is crucial. The potentially salary ranges, I put this here, and it really just depends on where you are in your career. So starting off, it's anywhere from 70 to 85K. And then for more senior roles, anywhere from 120 to 200K. Also, that depends on whether you are a freelancer or somebody who works in an agency. As a freelancer, you do have the opportunity to make a lot more, but again, it's a fluctuating salary because you are dependent on the projects that come to you. So what I do in a sentence, I transform complex scientific concepts into easily understandable content for healthcare professionals and patients. So I take all the research papers that has been, published, clinical trial results that have been published and on a particular drug, and I turn that into a deck, or I turn that into a podcast, or something that an HCP can easily digest and can easily understand. And then in terms of key research or key skills, I would say research skills is really important. And what I mean by that is the ability to know what to look for when you're Googling something, right? It's very important to not go down a rabbit hole when it comes to this job, because you're usually in a tight deadline and you want to make sure you have all the information that you have without going too deep that you're wasting your time. Scientific writing is also really important, as you need to be able to not only understand what you're reading, but able to write that in a concise manner that somebody else will understand. Editorial skills are also very important, as you move up in the career. A lot of the work that you're going to be doing will be more on the review process. So being able to spot, grammar and punctuation mistakes, or things where you're trying to make content more concise or punchier, if you will. And then communication skills are also important, as we're always talking to clients or talking to our colleagues, and being able to communicate what you need and not need, in addition to providing that in your written deliverables. And then project and time management, because it's really important for you to be able to prioritize your work, and a lot of work is going to come to you, and you have to be really vocal in providing that information to your colleagues of, okay, you've provided me with this task that I need to do, but I also have these other things, and just being able to manage that and prioritize what's important, because there's going to be competing priorities, and you have to be able to communicate that to your team members so that you are not swamped all the time. Other careers that I did consider was a research coordinator. So this was before, when I was looking for 2 months for a job. I was thinking about potentially going back to school to get a degree in clinical research, because my background was in the basic sciences. I also considered medical science liaison as a potential career option. And I didn't put it in here, but it reminded me during Jenny's presentation was I also thought about going into teaching. So as she said, I also enjoyed being a TA and communicating that information to the younger kids or younger generation was definitely something that I enjoyed. But those are obviously, I didn't go that path, but. So typical activities of a medical writer is there's going to be a lot of client meetings. So that's meetings with your pharmaceutical client or your biotech client. Usually it's status calls to provide them with updates of where their project is at, or a lot of the times they're kickoff calls and strategy calls where you are presenting your ideas to them, or they're presenting what their vision looks like, and it's really more of a conversation. Reading clinical papers about different therapy areas and new therapies is probably 80 to 90% of what I do. I'm always reading what's out there, like honing expanding my knowledge of different therapy areas, and getting up to speed on what's new out there, depending on the work that I'm doing. And creating content and slide decks is, again, another big aspect of what we do. The other thing that we do a lot is we prepare or develop agendas for advisory board meetings. So one of the things that agencies help pharmaceutical clients with is having a meeting with HCPs. They're called advisory board meetings, where they solicit feedback or recommendations on where to go with the information that they have. So usually they present their latest data, or they're presenting an idea, and then the HCPs or physicians would then be providing them with feedback on whether or not, this is the right direction, or what direction they should do, recommendations they have. So my job and task would be to develop those agendas so that we can get the proper feedback. And then with that comes writing the meeting reports that are associated with those advisory boards, and providing the kind of recommendations and next steps for our clients. The other thing that you could potentially be doing are attending conferences on behalf of clients. So one of the things that we do is you either are creating content that is being presented at the conference, and then you support your client in, making sure that the content is up to par, making sure everything works properly. The other thing would be attending the conference and doing competitive intelligence. So attending sessions, taking notes, and then writing a report on that and sharing that with your client to let them know of what other research and progress has been going on with other therapy or other competitors in the field. So why is my role important? Well, I enable HCPs and patients to learn about new therapies and new therapeutics in a wide variety of therapy areas. And I think it's really important because without medical writers, you wouldn't have your doctors know how to prescribe medicines, or what the evidence is of why that medicine is, it would be appropriate for you. I enjoy my role because every day is different, and I continuously learn about new and interesting therapy areas. As I mentioned, I get paid to learn. So it's why I enjoy doing this. No day is ever boring, and every day is different. There are definitely challenges associated with it because every day is so different. That includes tight timelines, or pivoting to a different project, ensuring that the clients are satisfied with your deliverable, even though you think you have this great idea and you think it's better to go this way. At the end of the day, the clients are the one that's paying for this, and so you have to kind of bite your ego and go with what they want. And then the hours are also very atypical. You can work a 9 to 5 in the medical writing field, but I typically do not see that. And there's also definite occasional weekend work, especially if you are attending ad boards or conferences, which usually are either in the evening or on weekends. Future career trajectory for this role. So in an agency setting, you could certainly go from a medical writer to senior to director to a VP of scientific services. And then for a freelancer, it would be more of a senior consultant. So you'd still be a freelancer, but you could expand your network so that you're not doing the majority of the writing. You could be more of a consultant, and you have a team of writers that are supporting you. Or you could completely just be a consultant where you're just providing strategic direction and not so much of the content work. So some advice I would suggest if you want to get into this field is that you have to love to write, and you have to love writing about science. You have to be passionate about continuous learning and research, and always looking for what's new out there. You also have to be able to communicate with different stakeholders. So although you are developing content for HCPs, it could be pharmacists, nurses, general practitioners, it could be specialists. And so you have to create deliverables that are targeted to those audiences, and they have different things that are important to them and important for them to learn. So you need to be able to do that. You also have to have a keen eye for details, because you're always reading papers, you're creating content, and you have to make sure that it is factually and scientifically correct. But at the same time, you have to be able to see the bigger picture. So is this slide deck conveying what I'm trying to achieve? Is it providing the information that's important? Is it holistic? So you have to have both an eye for details so that you can see the minutia of things, but at the same time, be able to understand, is this hitting the mark? Time management skills is really important, as I touched upon earlier. As a freelancer, you manage your own time. And so if you have to be able to know what to prioritize and when to prioritize things, and obviously be able to vocalize that to your clients or to your peers, to be like, hey, you just asked me to pivot to do this. How am I gonna, like, what are you want? Something's got to give. So that's definitely really important. And then in terms of networking opportunities, I would say reaching out to other writers on LinkedIn. A lot of people have reached out to me, and I've spoken to them, on occasion. And I think it's one of the things that's super important, is just not be afraid to reach out to people. The worst they can do is ignore you or not say no. But a lot of the times people love to talk about themselves and love to talk about how they got to where they are, and obviously would like to pass it forward. So I encourage you to do that. And also attend those university career networking nights. I definitely attended a few of those to understand more about the medical writing career and where I could potentially go within that field. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and hopefully to answer some of your questions.
Great, thank you. We're going to stop the recording now. But on behalf of the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design, I'd like to thank both Jenny and Kristel for their fantastic talks. I actually didn't know a lot about this field of work, and you really hit on some good points.